I'm Ross Rosenberg. Welcome to my latest YouTube video and podcast. Today, I have the esteemed pleasure to announce and to introduce Brook Olsen, a colleague, a friend, someone who has a vested interest in helping people, whether they're codependent or others struggling with divorce and trying to get through complicated process, especially if you have children, with the minimal amount of damage, loss, and consequence. But I think that's an oversimplification of what you do, Brooke. So can you introduce yourself and tell us more about what you do and primary focus of your work?
Yeah, Ross, thank you for having me back. I am the founder and director of the High Conflict Diversion Program, which is really a program that I put together for people that are going through high conflict divorces. And that really includes people that are dealing with narcissists, other personality disorders, borderline, and just high conflict personalities in general.
Right.
And I also have a podcast that we've shared together as well, and that's a high conflict parenting podcast. And my focus is to help bring people into relationship with their situation at the earliest stages that I can. But whether they're at the beginning, the middle, or in a protracted litigation piece, the fundamental pieces that I bring to them are a process in which they can orient to their situation, that they can understand what they're in the middle of, and then begin to disengage from that stickiness that comes with high conflict personalities. So if we're talking about narcissism or whatnot, the food that they feed on is the conflict. It's that engagement and the manipulation that comes with it. They get off on that, if you will. So what I try to do is get a orientation to what it is that they're getting stuck to, that personality, and how to find an off-ramp from it.
What's a typical client look like? Because, as you were explaining, there's a range of personality types that cause high conflict. But if someone was to look for your help, someone who knew that by themselves they would not be able to succeed in a high conflict divorce, what does that person look like, knowing that there's a wide range of personality types and situations?
A person told me early on in my process, when I was going through a high conflict divorce 25 years ago, the statement was made, as goes the marriage, so goes the divorce. How goes the relationship, so goes the separation. So if you feel like you have been in an abusive relationship, if you've been manipulated through your life, if you feel like you're getting gaslit, that you don't know where you're at, where you're getting in a place where you can't orient to the situation in a way that makes sense, that's the person that comes to me and says, help.
Right. Yeah, well, it's interesting because there's no coincidence that you and I cross paths, because the folks that usually find me are individuals that identify with the term codependency, or what I call self-love deficit disorder. And they have this lifetime history of taking care of others at the expense of themselves. And because of the human magnet syndrome and the way the opposite personality types attract, they tend to marry people who are pathologically narcissistic or have the narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, or antisocial personality disorder. And I never intend to break up a marriage or relationship. But according to family systems theory, if someone is in a dysfunctional relationship and there is balance in that the codependent gives up all their power, the narcissist takes it, there's a stability going on. But when they seek help from me and they engage in my self-love recovery treatment program, everything changes. They start to have hope. They start to learn strategies. They start to heal wounds and traumas and much, much more. And then everything goes out of balance.
Well, in any family system, like you're talking about, Ross, in any system, when you remove a piece from it, it seeks to find homeostasis. It wants to pull it back in. And that narcissistic personality, that borderline personality, is trying to pull that person back in and hold them in that system. So when you break that out, one of two things has to happen.
Right.
It has to reorganize, or it has to fall apart.
Right.
And what we're looking for is to have it fall apart if we can.
We're doing very similar things, but coming from it at different angles. So the system, as we talk about, all relationship systems, whether this family you grew up in, whether it's relationship with friends, whether it's an intimate relationship you have with a spouse or a love partner, there is this kind of agreement on your personality type. And the way the dysfunctional system works with codependents and narcissists, and I quote this for people who are listening to the podcast, air quotes, for it to be dysfunctionally balanced, the codependent has to give up all their power. They have to be invisible. The person with self-love deficit disorder, that's the word I use for codependency, cannot push their needs, cannot set boundaries. And when they do that, everything's in balance. But what happens is the children, the SLD, they suffer while the codependent prospers. So when they seek help from me, they read my book, they start to get hope. And I would imagine it's the exact same thing when they contact you. The system starts to go out of whack because they no longer are willing to sacrifice and put up with so much pain. So when they just give us a call, let alone when they start our services, things get heated. So I'd like for you to talk about how you work in your initial stages with clients that call you, knowing that just the act of calling you and engaging you in your services, or mine, if I were to talk about it, how do you assure them? I know you can't promise a positive outcome, but how do you assure them that things are going to work out, considering so much chaos has been a part of their family and relationship legacy?
So I was thinking about this morning, and there's a balance that has to happen with my clients. And fear is what's driving this most of the time. They're breaking a pattern. They don't know what it's going to look like. Nobody's giving them the information that they need to traverse it. And on top of that, their internal landscape is unstable. They're not sure of what they can do and what that's going to look like. So if they've been in an abusive, controlling relationship, their notion is if I do this, it's going to get worse.
Right.
And the truth of the matter is, it's going to get worse. That's
right.
usually the place. But we know that if we can travel this long enough, there's going to be a peak, and then there's going to be a downregulation in that system that starts to find that power differentiation change. So if that person is coming into this in an activated manner, which they usually do, that's problematic for them.
Right.
It's viewed as problematic from the family law system. It's like we have to come in and we've got to give them a critical thought path, so that they can look at where I am and where I want to go. And most people don't know that. Right. And not only do they not know where I am or where I want to go, they don't know how to get there. So we want to start to set a template in place for them so we can separate the emotion from the critical thought, and then bring it back together in a manner that is cohesive and gives them a template to find that off-ramp for this relationship.
Right.
But they've got to understand that the court system is not going to solve their problem.
No.
They've got to understand that their therapist is not going to solve their problem. They've got to understand that their pathway through this, I think, is child-focused.
Right.
Where do I want to take them? And how do I want to change this patterning, knowing that this disordered personality on the other side is going to fight them in every way that they can.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. And I don't know if you know about, I have another part of my job. I provide expert witness testimony. And about 95% of the people that call me and want to hire me as an expert witness, I talk them out of using me because they have this idea that they're going to be able to get someone who's really smart and knowledgeable on narcissism and narcissistic abuse and gaslighting and go in and tell the judge or the court, this guy's bad and this person's good and everything will be great. And perhaps the best value that I give these clients, and this could be a client seeking treatment also, is to explain how the court system works, that they don't really want to get involved emotionally. They don't want to hear emotions. As you said, they don't want to be the arbiter of peace. They just want to make black and white decisions based upon information given to them. And the person who acts the most emotionally dysregulated often is the person that is ignored the most. And so what you're doing is very similar to what I'm doing, is I'm trying to proactively explain to my clients or a expert witness potential client is that there is a certain protocol, there's a certain group of steps that happen that are perfunctory, they're mechanical. And you got to go through those, and you have to have an attorney align with your request, your hopes, in order to methodically go through this, because the emotions and the anxiety and SLDs are victims of gaslight and abuse. They have a good reason to have that. That can get in their way and sabotage them. How do you help someone who's so rightfully activated and hurt and upset? How do you help them not hurt their case because of their emotional entanglement and often dysregulation?
So I want to hear their story, but
Yeah.
I want to cut their story off before they get deep into it. I want to pull the pieces out that are relevant to their case and teach them that this other stuff is noise.
Yes.
If they bring the noise in, they're distracting their focus that they need to be putting in front of the judge, and as well as they're creating more chaos in the system
Right.
that people can't see through.
Right.
What are the pieces that are important here that are factual,
Mm-hmm.
that are deliverable,
Yeah.
and that can be articulated?
Right.
And they need to take those pieces to their attorney, not have their attorney fish them out of, because most attorneys aren't good at bringing these pieces out. And when you're talking to your attorney, you're spending a lot of money
Oh
for
my
them
gosh.
to try to find these pieces. So when they come to me, we lay it out on the table and we start to create a template for what are the pieces that are important. What
Right.
do you need to tell your attorney? And in many cases, with a lot of attorneys that I work with, I go to the attorney and I tell them, this is what I see, because oftentimes
Right.
I have way more information of the family system, if you will,
Yeah.
than that attorney does, and I've distilled it.
It's interesting. What you and I do are very similar. I ask permission for my client to speak with attorney, and I always want to talk with my client present, and I also want to prepare the conversation with my client so that they feel like they're a part of it. But my clients are often so emotional and so hurt and bruised that they overwhelm attorneys, and attorneys are not psychotherapists. In
Right.
fact, they're the opposite. They're not known for their compassionate listening and empathy. Some are, but not, most aren't. And if you overwhelm them, you can easily hurt yourself more than help.
But part of that conversation, Ross, I think,
Yes.
when I'm having that with my client, I want to be empathetic with them. I want to connect with them, but I don't want to collude with them. And I'm not going to step in and get down into all of this stuff. A lot of the things that happen in a conversation with a client that is coming to me is, yeah, I hear that that's really important, but I want you to hear that that doesn't matter. I want to let you know that, yeah, that is really a hard piece and you're in turmoil with that, but that doesn't matter.
Give us an example of what that is, an example of what is so important to that person that you have to explain sometimes in a way that is so disappointing that it doesn't matter.
A person will come to me and they'll say, you know, Brooke, the other parent's never been in this child's life. You know, I do all the child rearing, I get them to school, I make their breakfast, I take them to the doctor's appointment and all of that. And my point to them will be, well, that's really great, but that's changing. And that may have been your agreement in your relationship, but the court doesn't look at that because now this other person has got the responsibility to do that, but they don't know how. But they're going to learn how, and they've got to have a ramp to get there. So you're concerned that they've never done it really doesn't matter. What we want to do is we want to set in place a solution that leads that person to that ability to do that. And if they show up and they do it, that's great. And if they don't show up and do it, then you've got something to talk about down the road. But right now, that doesn't matter. So let's create the pathway.
We help them manage their expectations. Their expectations are often not realistic. They might have been watching too many movies or read online articles or people who say, you know, they triumphed in court. But to manage the expectation of what happens, what a judge actually wants to listen to, what is actually considered proof and what's not proof, and to prepare them for that if they want to pursue a higher level of control, autonomy, that they might have to go all the way into a trial. And the trial is not always to everyone's best interest.
Right.
Can you talk about that fine line in guiding people's or managing their expectation and helping them or reality grounding them to what they can and can't do and the expense of it?
So high conflict divorces, high conflict custody battles usually are the centerpiece of these divorces. And until that custody piece gets done, the divorce continues and continues and continues. And sometimes this can go on for years. Yes. You know, a divorce in this country, I don't care where you're at, is going to take at least a year, 18 months if there's no problems. And if it's high conflict, it's going 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, 5 years. I've seen them go 7, 8, 9 years.
Yes,
and people spend hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in these pieces. And there is no end to it except the children take the hit. They're left in an anxious world with two warring parents, and they've got no stability. So expectations are, listen, you have a responsibility to your children.
Right.
And the responsibility of the children means that you have to be able to show up, and you can't be dysregulated all the time. And this whole thing is going to dysregulate you because it already has.
Right.
So how do we create stability for you? So let's find the life path where you are in the flow of your life in a regular basis as much as you can. You pick your kids up, you get them to school, you get their food, you go to work, you show up for their activities, and you don't worry about what the other parent is doing. But they go, but that other parent is a horrible parent.
Right.
And what I tell them is that's not against the law.
Interesting. It's not against the law, and it's hard to prove in court.
So the place where you're going to be successful is where you are successful with your parenting. So how do we do that in a way that keeps you from being entangled with this other parent? So I have basically a mantra of 3 statements: disengage, disengage, and disengage. When you disengage with that personality disorder on the different levels that I preach, you start to find that through line in your life, that life path that
Right.
you're not feeding the animal. And you find that you've got actually power, and that the court is not going to, if you approach it properly, punish you for not being a quote co-parent.
Right. And that reality is a tough pill to swallow, because the truth of the matter often is the angry, activated, beleaguered, formerly crushed parent is the one that is doing most of the parenting. But when it comes down to a divorce, the other parent steps up, and they can't pull back the past. They don't want to see videotape. And that's a part of helping our clients manage expectations. They don't want to hear recordings. They don't want to see text messages. What they want are as much facts as they can, and to move forward without having to pick who's the good guy or the bad guy. And what I really appreciate about your work is you get to be kind of, well, you are a coach, very matter of fact, you shouldn't do this, you should do this, stop doing this. For me, it's more nuanced and balanced because I'm also a psychotherapist, and I can't come on too strongly because my clients are vulnerable and hurt. And so I have to find a way to support them to help their emotional health so that they can work successfully with someone like you, if they're so lucky to hire you, or their attorney. Because if I cross the boundary and get a little bit too opinionated, that kind of nullifies and kind of neutralizes my psychotherapy. Tell the listener, the viewers, how you work with other therapists alongside the client to get positive outcomes.
Ross, you're one of those psychotherapists that understands the system. Most don't. And because they don't, they create a bigger problem because they're trying to empower a client in a way that is counterproductive to them getting through the system.
Yeah. They give them false hopes,
right?
And they give them these ideas that, good always prevails, and judges listen to each side and make a decision when in fact it's far from the truth.
So I try to work with psychotherapists like yourself that have some understanding of that, but many of the people are working with therapists that don't understand that. So I go to them and I say, listen, that's all really good. I think it's great that you're working with them, but I really want you to understand that this is going to get in your way. And if you do this,
I like
you're going to create a bigger problem.
So you're also guiding the therapist and helping them stay in their lane. And if we use that as a metaphor, and help them not cause more traffic, or if we really push the metaphor forward, or an accident.
Right. But the client has to do that piece because I don't always have access to their therapist.
Yeah.
So I have to be able to tell them, listen, I want you in therapy. That's great. You need to understand how you got here, but you are here and this is what's going to happen going forward. And that behavior that they're suggesting that you do is going to create a bigger problem in your parenting and in this parallel parenting world that I try to induce them into. So the movement that I have as a coach is I have enough understanding about the legal system.
Right.
I have enough understanding, or a really good understanding, of the psychological process of this enmeshed process that they've been in. So I can help them break that, but you're going to go through this process of the legal system to get to your custody, to get to your parenting plan, to get to your MSA. And if you...
An MSA is, for those who don't know,
marriage settlement agreement.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And if you break in and you do these other things, you're going to get stuck here because you're going to not be able to show what it is that you want to show. Oh, they're an alcoholic. Oh, they're a drug addict. Huh. Have they ever had a run-in with the law with it? Nope. Have they ever had a DUI? Nope.
Nope.
But they drink every night. Huh. So how are you going to put that forward? If
Yeah.
you press that, you're pressing an argument. If
Right.
you allow for this to organically unfold, they're going to make a mistake. Let them make that mistake and
Right.
then make the move. But in the meantime, the court systems have this tendency to land almost across this country at this point in this middle ground of each parent is going to get equal parenting time.
I still carry the scars of the old system. I divorced my son's mom in 1988, and it was standard for men just as default, a father who's just as good as the mom to get, it would be joint, and I'm quoting this, joint custody, and the father visit the child every other weekend and one night a week. And then they kind of went to the other way, and which at first I was going, cool. Finally, guys or men, or for that part, most partners, there's a higher chance of equal visitation. But my sense is, and I'd like you to talk about it, has the pendulum swung to kind of this strict adherence to equality without really wanting to hear why it should change that and decide differently?
Well, I think that there's a status quo piece that the courts look at to a large degree, but even if it's imbalanced in the beginning,
Yep.
and this parent is showing up and showing up and showing up, it's going to move in their direction and
Right.
toward that 50-50 piece. Now, if they don't show up and they continue to be late picking up, not showing up for the kids, asking the other parent to take care of them, not having good parenting skills, that's the organic piece where it goes in the other direction. And to me, I don't want my client going back into court to codify that. I tell them, take what you got. You got
Right.
50%. And if they want to give it to you, just keep taking it.
Right.
Don't ask for more money. Don't enter the court system. Don't go into that process because it's going to reignite the fight. And if we've done our job and we've allowed this piece or managed to get this piece down regulated so there is some level of consistency for that child, that's the goal.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up because we're managing our clients. I'm managing the mental health and what I call the self-love recovery. There are codependents who have never had a voice, who through the progress experience attained in my treatment program, they start to have a voice. They start to experience a sense of personal efficacy and strength. They start to set boundaries. And they hope that the court system is going to recognize that. And sometimes the best thing I can do is to explain the court system has no feelings. It has little time. And the only time it really wants to make a difficult decision is if you go into a trial, and the trials don't always guarantee victory. And as you said earlier, can be horribly expensive. So piggybacking on what you said, to downregulate, I actually don't use that term, but I like it, to downregulate our client, to get them focused on what they have to do. And in my case, the mental health component of it, and just continue the status quo of being the better parent.
This is a problem-solving process for our clients, and they have to be focused on that. And when their emotions get in there around their kids, I have to question what their motivation is sometimes,
Right.
because some of the parents that come to me have an emotional dependency on their children that they're not even aware of.
And that, in its extreme, is called emotional incest, which can be very harmful. But please continue.
And there becomes a parentification also, where the
Right.
children become the caretaker for that parent. And
Yes.
that's not their job. So what I try to do is get the people that come to me focused on what are the child's needs. And when the child isn't with you, you need to live your life. You need to get some stability in your world. You need to have some fun. You need to do things that help you be resilient, because when that child comes back, if the other parent is off and they don't do a good job, you got to be able to show up and give them the stability that they don't have there.
Right.
And over time, when a parent can do that, the child starts to understand where their stability is, and they lean into the safety, they lean into that stability. And that's where they get that sense of secure attachment that is so necessary for a stable psychological platform for them going forward in their life.
And to that end, I will help my client understand, because as a therapist, you can't always just tell someone facts and hope that they understand, because there's a deeper focus. And I'll help them understand that the very best thing they can do for their children is to keep their children out of it and refocus them on their day to day. So if they have been leaning on their children for support, have used them as a spokesperson, an intermediary, or even are accidentally triangulating or accidentally poisoning the minds of their children. You got to remember, I'm not working with narcissists. So my clients have the capability of taking feedback and considering it and often working on it.
That's typically my client as well. I usually get the people that are trying to do it right.
Right. And so I explain to them, as you do, that you don't want your child to go through what you did as a child and take on these monumental worries before you were ever ready or capable of it. The best thing we can do is just have them live their life and say, you got it, even when you don't think you got it. And they get it. My clients think, speaking of getting it, my clients, when I explain it that way and help them understand that the best parenting they can do is to put kind of blinders on the children so they don't really have to know or deal with that, then things often turn out much better for the family and the kids. But sometimes it's counterintuitive for my clients because they've been fighting so long. What is the advice that you have for your clients or my clients who are so beaten down and so tired and so beaten up, and they finally decide they're going to get a divorce? What is your method, your technique to just kind of calm them down and help them understand that there are things that can be done that will be helpful, but to build in patience, hopefulness, but manage their expectations?
I like to use the word orientation a lot, you can tell already.
Yes.
And I like to help them orient to where they're at
Yes.
and how they got there. And oftentimes, the blind spot is that they don't realize that this is a multi-generational problem,
Right.
that they might not have looked at it, but they went through this as a kid in some way, shape, or form. And they are acting the way one of their parents were acting in that process.
Right.
And where that was either a positive or a negative in that process for them.
Well, usually, and I'm assuming you're trying to point out that it was a negative, that they experienced it as a child to help them get, because I do the same thing. So we help them get more empathy for the children and understand that getting them involved or giving them too much information is going to hurt them, by reminding what happened to them and how they were triangulated or used as a weapon for the other parent. I'd like for you to close this conversation off by saying, speak to a client out there, I guess you call them clients, a patient, a client, why they need your help and what you can do in a larger picture.
I think everybody that is going through a divorce, whether it's low conflict, medium conflict, or high conflict, their first movement should be to find a good coach.
Yes.
And that good coach is going to help them separate the emotion from the cognitive process, from that critical thought. That coach, if they're a good coach, is going to help them get to what they want, because most people don't know, one, what they want, or two, what's available, or three, what they should be giving up. Because there's a give up in this on some level. And the place that I want them to find is how do you get on with your life? Because this ain't happening, and this is a brain drain. This is an emotional drain on your life force. So what is it that you want to get to, and what is important? And the important piece here is the children and how we parent and how we get them out of that. And then to start to dissect the pieces out so that they can see a map, because nobody is giving them a map. You can't find your way off.
Right. If asked the same question, what I would say to a client is, and I love this analogy, absolutely love it. It's the analogy of when you go into a plane, then the oxygen mask drop down. They say, before you put the oxygen mask on your child, put it on yourself, because you're no good if you pass out from asphyxiation. You're no good to the child. My message to anyone listening or watching is that aside using the very valuable resources such as your coaching program, you have to find a way to take care of yourself. Because if you don't nurture yourself and heal from the wounds that you've accumulated over the course of the years that finally built up to your decision to divorce, if you can't heal the wounds and come up with some level of emotional stability and strength to go through maybe the most difficult experience of your life, it's not going to work as easily and potentially fail. That they need to have self-love instead of self-hate, self-respect. They need to turn their shame into self-love or self-acceptance. So it's building on their emotional strengths and teaching them how to take care of themselves, and why that is so important to everything that comes afterwards.
If they don't, they're going to repeat it.
Can you repeat? If they don't, they're going to what?
Repeat it.
Repeat it. Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And going back to the generational part, and I'm glad you brought that up, is to bring up that this goes from generation to generation. And what I teach is to stop it, is you have to first heal yourself, find some healing middle ground, some plateau where you can neutralize your self-love deficit disorder or codependency and build that into self-love abundance. This has been wonderful. And I really believe that your information, or that the sum of all the information in this discussion, is going to be helpful to people. So thank you, Brooke. I always appreciate talking with you and getting a chance to do these discussions.
And if people want to reach out, they can come to our website, which is highconflict.net. Got a membership site that has a lot of resources in there, and that is disengaged at highconflict.net. And then we've got our podcast that you and I have done a couple of times and shared, and that is the High Conflict Co-Parenting Podcast. Those are some basic resources. Love to hear from you guys. And Ross, again, thank you for having me again.
And I could not more highly recommend your services to anyone that's listening and watching. All right, man, let's keep in touch, and let's keep trying to change the world one person at a time.
Do that. Thank you, Ross.
Bye-bye.
Take care.